Hey everyone, Casella here. This episode is going out right before the US election, which feels real weird. I'm going to skip my usual preamble plug, hoping this gives you a bit of distraction, or that you're listening to it in some at least slightly less dread-filled future. Okay, on to the show. A critic is a creature who has views quite like a camel's. Flowers and fruit he scorns. In the flower garden of the honeyed muse he starves, unless he finds a meal of thorns. Welcome to A Meal of Thorns, a critical book club from the Ancillary Review of Books. I'm Jake Casella Brookins. Each episode, we ask critics, writers, and scholars to talk us through the books that have lodged in their minds, their pet theories, their possibly problematic faves, the thorny ideas and haunting imagery that they keep coming back to. This week, we're talking to Shinjini Day about Lena Krone's TAINARON, Mail from Another City. Shinjini Day is a critic, writer, and editor. Her work has appeared in the Los Angeles Review of Books, the Cleveland Review of Books, Strange Horizons, Contemporaries of Post 45, a little venue called the Ancillary Review of Books, and many more. Shinjini won the Dream Foundry Writing Contest in 2021, and she's recently had short fiction published with Ergot. Shinjini, thanks so much for joining us. How you doing?
Thank you so much for having me on here. I'm doing okay. It's been sort of changing weather where I am, and I'm
Mm.
enjoying that.
What's the weather there right now?
It's stopped being hot tropical summer, and it's sort of shifting back into a sort of calmer, wintry situation where it's going to get really difficult and smoggy
Mm.
because in Delhi, where I am right now, because
Mm-hmm.
of the fires that happened during Diwali.
Oh,
So
okay.
I'm quite afraid for that. But
Yeah.
otherwise, I'm enjoying this little transition period.
We've been having here really lovely sunsets, but it's because of the wildfires like out west and up in Canada here. But thus far, the smoke hasn't actually like reached us yet. So I'm just kind of enjoying the nice visuals and hoping it doesn't actually affect our air quality. So we'll see.
It's
Yeah.
such a strange thing to be enjoying great sunsets, though.
Yeah. Uh-huh. I know every time I see a really good one, I'm like, ooh, there's a bad reason for that. But it looks nice.
Yeah.
Before we get going, what else have you been reading? What else have you been working on? Anything good?
Right now, I've made the move back to grad school,
Mm-hmm.
and mostly I've been overwhelmed by reading for school itself. So I've been reading a lot of the canon again.
Mm.
And I'm sitting with reading Eliot, and I'm reading Silas Marner, I'm reading Gaskell's Cranford, I'm reading Dickens,
Mm-hmm.
I'm reading a lot of Marx because I
Okay.
have to for school. And but I've also been enjoying, otherwise, on the genre side, I've been reading a lot of the post-exotic novels.
Oh,
Have
cool.
you heard of them?
Yeah, I just read Cree, which was my first one I've read of
Oh,
those, and now I want to go read like a bunch more because I really liked it.
I was reading Melville's Dreams
Mm.
and Post Exoticism in 12 lessons or
Mm-hmm.
11 lessons, yeah. And both of them are really odd books.
Mm-hmm.
They're so strange, they're so surreal, they kind of drop you in the middle of the world and
Mm-hmm.
force you to kind of make sense of who is speaking to whom and where, how many layers of deception are going on, and whether
Mm-hmm.
there's any meaning to that deception at all. And it's the setting. They're really good novels, I will say. I think I'm quite interested in Wolverine's project.
Yeah, I had gotten just a review copy of Cree and didn't really know anything about it, which the author on that is Manuela Drager. So I just kind of read it and loved it, and then when I finished, I started reading around. I was like, oh, actually, this is part of this whole big post-exotic project, and there's like, what's the total? Is it like 49 other works or something like that? Really interesting, and strange and sort of disconcerting, but in really interesting ways. Yeah, really dig that. I want to carve out space to read more.
I think there are 49 novels, and then
Hmm.
there are four established, four of these pseudonymous authors that he'll name. I think Lutzman is one of them,
Yeah.
Drager is another, and Drager was, I think, in the science fiction, the Vandermeer collections
Hmm.
as well, very early on. I think one of the New Weird ones, not sure. I'll
Oh,
have to
okay.
look at it again.
Hmm.
And that, like, it would be funny because that's a good segue to like sort of drop back into Tainaron
Yeah.
because Vandermeer is a huge champion of that. TAINARON as well,
Yeah,
which
sort of
I
like,
encountered TAINARON because of Vandermeer himself, I mean.
yeah, they've been really big boosters for the sort of like global weird and strange genre stuff. Yeah, that's cool. I just finished reading, oh, I shouldn't say I finished. I read the first volume of On the Calculation of Volume by Sylvage Ball. Have you heard of this?
Oh no, I haven't.
It's a seven part novel or seven novel series from Sylvage Ball, who I believe is Danish, and it's kind of a time loop story. It's this woman who's a rare book dealer, and she becomes sort of stuck in the day of November 18, but it's a very different approach to it. It's not orny or hokey. It's her journal, and she's this very like reflective, contemplative person who starts sort of like meditating on the nature of time and has like this, I don't know, some really interesting kind of thoughts about like ourselves as ghosts haunting the world, and she's able to see that now. Yeah, really fascinating. That's from New Directions, who've been putting out a lot of good translated work in English lately. Yeah, that just really kind of blew me away. And also, I
And
think if
there's 7 novels,
yeah, there's
seven
seven.
volumes.
I don't know if they're all written yet, but that's what it's supposed. I know the first five have been, and the first two have been translated into English by Barbara Havland, and I think she and New Directions are planning to do the whole seven. And they're all pretty slender. They're like, I want to say it's like 160 pages or something like that. But yeah, really really
I
interesting stuff. And I think if we need another transition point, I think also won the Nordic Council Prize for Literature, which I think Tanneron did as well or was longlisted for.
Yes, it was. It was. Dylan won a lot of these, or was nominated for a lot of these awards. I don't think Neela Kron, who here has was very big in the scene before Taineron came out.
Mm,
I think she had some of her breakout novels before that, and then Taineron kind of got shot into a lot of fame because it was nominated also for the World Fantasy.
hmm.
And then people were talking about it, and I'm surprised to see the amount of noise around that novel as well, around when it did come up.
Yeah, let's dive into it. So today we're talking about Lena Krone's Tainaron with the subtitle "Mail from Another City." It was originally published in 1985 in Finland, and then its 2004 English translation by Hildy Hawkins, which is what we're discussing today, was published by Prime Books. The novel is constructed as a set of 30 letters that are sent from a person who is in this city called Tainaron, which is populated by giant insect-like people. Yeah, it was nominated for all kinds of stuff. The Finlandia Prize, the Nordic Council Literature Prize, the World Fantasy Award, the International Horror Guild Award. And it did win the what was it called? The Thanks for the Book Award in Finland, which I think is a great title for an award. And if after listening to us talk about it, if you haven't heard of this before and you're interested in reading more of Crone's work, there is a really big collection of her work translated into English, which is by Anne and Jeff Vandermeer's Cheeky Frog imprint, which is where I was able to get a hold of this. So yeah, tell me. So this book had been like I'd seen it on lists, but I'd never really heard anybody talking about it that much. And then when you suggested this, I jumped right on it. Really, really enjoyed it a lot. I was wondering like what was your experience with the book? If you're like your first impressions or what it was like to come back to it.
So I encountered Lena Kron for the first time because I was making this sort of glossary list of fun novels to read while looking through Jeff Vandermeer's Wonder Book. In the one book, he has a little section where he talks about Kron, and then there's a little interview with Kron as well. And he mentions Styron in one of those strange, odd cities, weird cities segment. And so that's the first time I checked it out. And you can't really help but sort of dive into Dinosaur and imagine, look at it through the ambit of, all the books about odd cities.
Hmm.
And so immediately you think of Calvino's Invisible Cities. But for me, I think what struck me for the first time, because I was also reading Rennie Gladman at the time,
Hmm.
the Ravika novels. And that came up immediately. And in rereading as well, I think I was caught up on that figure of the surveyor. I think we'll talk about that later.
Hmm.
But that was one of those things that really crept up on me. And it's that sense of unconcrete, uncertain, sort of existential sort of setting but at the same time, it's extremely sad. It's a very sad novel,
Yeah.
and it sort of struck me with a sense of like bitterness and sorrow and this trying to constantly connect to each other
Mm-hmm.
that felt really significant to me. And I think when you brought up podcast, I immediately wanted to think about something that was slightly off center because we end up talking so much about like common genre books that we kind of it sort of slips by these these narratives of like that are, I think, not necessarily cynical, but pessimistic
Mm-hmm.
about or a little disappointed about the possibilities of genre itself as well.
Yeah.
And that's that's interesting to me, I think.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, I mean, so first off, 100% agree with all those points. The what is it that cities are doing, like strange cities are doing, when they work in fiction so well, was really something I was thinking about a lot with this. But one of the biggest things I was thinking about reading this, and this is my first time reading it, was yeah, those kind of like existential, sort of like psychological reflections throughout it. It's sort of like yeah, you put it like sort of like a longing for connection, that's really kind of shining through. And there are these big chunks in it that made me think about depression and how depression works, and how we try to communicate that. Yeah, really good. That's an interesting point about the way that in talking about genre novels, we fixate on sort of like what's with the big dumb objects, like the kind of like glitzy, flashy stuff that I think sort of like distracts us maybe from some of the more interesting stuff they're doing. I was thinking because the Vandermeers collected this thing that I was reading, I was thinking a lot about them and about Jeff's work in I've been revisiting the Southern Reach trilogy, because of the fourth one coming out here, Absolution. And a thing that has always really like stuck in my mind about Annihilation is not all of the kind of surreal, horror or alien or whatever it is but just the character of the biologist, because I've never really met a character like that, and the way that she's trying to express who she is and how she connects to the land. That's not like a thing I see expressed very much, and like was one of the first times I felt like I really, really saw myself in a character. And but that note is like so different from all this other like huge flashy stuff going on in Annihilation, obviously. But that's really what stuck with me. And in this book, even though there are all of these, I mean, insect people are kind of the least strange thing about this novel, but they're pretty strange. They're good. But yeah, I found myself thinking about these little moments she has that sort of dream about kissing the person that the letter's addressed to. And there's a moment where the narrator just kind of like shares a look with Longhorn, who's sort of her local guide.
I was also struck by like it's great that you mentioned the Vandermeers doing, championing this text, but also sort of their work sort of being reflective a little bit of the kinds of things that they do pick up.
Hmm.
So whether it's post-exotic work or TAINARON, I think there's something like Cheeky Frog's entire collection. I wish I had the time to have gone through it all.
Yeah.
I think there's it's an 850 page tome.
Hmm. Yeah.
It's a long one. I think that there's something of, these affective sort of, I don't know whether to call it people who are a little torn down by the world or unsure about the
Mm.
world or where they are. And that sensibility sort of creeps in, and then they're constantly in search of something
Hmm.
bigger, more meaningful, which is also replicated in Time. It's there in Vandermeer's Hummingbird Salamander, which I think you told
Yeah.
me to read.
Hmm.
And it was a great experience as well. This sort of constant searching, and even the search itself is made into a point of, criticism.
Hmm.
That sort of detective novel that gets to the heart of how we are even stuck, even in trying to figure things out. And I think Tanaron does that too. It sort of moves between her trying to figure out where she is, why she's there, why she's in this strange city in the first place.
Hmm.
So it begins with that sort of address, right? From between in that epistolary format where she's constantly in the very beginning addressing the addressing the seemingly lover of
Right.
the figure. And we think it's a lover at least because there's a lot of endearing, there's a lot of like cajoling, there's why won't you write back to me? Where are
Mm-hmm.
you? And why don't my letters get to you? And then finally towards the end, there's mention of mooning and kissing and lovemaking
Mm-hmm.
towards the absolute end. So we get a sense that there's a lover involved and an absent lover in some form. Either the
Mm-hmm.
lover is dead or the lover is just unresponsive.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I read somewhere as well, I'm not entirely certain, somebody, I think it's in the Cheeky Frog appendix sections where the essays are on TAINARON, where the lover is also compared to having, instead of the lover, it's us that is being
Uh,
addressed,
uh-huh.
the readers themselves. And that's that that like that simple thought that we could be reading and the sort of cajoling, demanding, sorrowful entreaty is being made of us, and then we're still so unable, helpless to sort of read back into it. Oh, that's gorgeous stuff and
Yeah.
painfully gorgeous stuff. I think it makes me go back to that thing about the look, the gaze, which she goes back to over and over.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's first encountered in it comes up in the sixth chapter for the first time, and then it's she looks at them and she looks at these insect people, and again insect people important to her because she's inspired by J.H. Fabre, I think if I'm pronouncing that right, who's an entomologist,
Oh, okay.
and I think she spent a lot, and it's in the epigraph as well, where she kind of mentions these two figures that she's sort of writing to, which is Fabre and Angelus Silesius. And I looked them up. One of them is an entomologist, and the other is is a mystic.
Okay.
And it's very interesting that she brought them together
Huh.
in the beginning. She's in the sixth chapter. She's looking at the eyes of these people, and she calls them people. She never veers away from calling the
Mm-hmm.
insects people, and she's thinking about them and saying that, oh, there are so many eyes, they look at us so differently. Oh, are they also different? This sort of structure sort of gets constantly established where she's looking at them and thinking, oh, they might be different, and then are we different? That looking backwards and forwards between the look and then that look immediately, like intermittently, not immediately, intermittently comes back to haunt the text.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's later on when she's in the section with in the Hades section, I think,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
with Longhorn, and they're looking at a crematorium of sorts.
Yeah.
And then she's thinking, how do they deal with the dead? And Longhorn's just lost a friend, and she's accompanying him, and she's feeling like, okay, I clearly have not paid much attention to his feeling of sorrow, his feeling of having lost somebody.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking about how this whole structure works. And then she catches him, and then he has a look, and there's a moment where they both stare at each other, and she's like, why don't we keep having that moment where we both realize that something is lost and
Mm-hmm.
won, and then she keeps returning to it over and over. That sense of where she finds humanity somehow. That is the gaze of humanity or something like that, that she says later as well. And I don't quite know what that look says. Do you?
Yeah, I mean that scene in the kind of like the Hall of the Dead, the Hades section, that was like the scene out of the whole thing that stuck in my brain the most, just really jumped out at me. So this is her friend, like guide, Longhorn. I think we need to talk more about Longhorn. He's really interesting. But I have written down here, so she sees the kindness of his eyes and then sort of exclaims that it ever disappears, calls it the soundless glitter of immense treasures, that it could be extinguished and sink into the cold mass of raw material, as if it had not been anything more than the moisture of lacrimal fluid on the surface of the cornea. And that just got me. I was thinking a lot about maybe Emmanuel Levinas or Martin Buber and what they've done with sort of like the face or the look, the I and thou kind of idea, that every person has a personhood in them that is kind of walled off from us most of the time, and that we're always sort of in danger of forgetting, and that the narrator is sort of like haunted by kind of haunted on both sides, like haunted by seeing it and also haunted by realizing that you cannot see it, that you can forget about it. And this idea that, the sort of crude matter, the sort of physicality of the body, it can be a window, but it can also be a wall. And there's this sort of longing, the whole novel for me is saturated with this really intense, interesting kind of loneliness, but it's a longing loneliness, it wants something. There's a lot of thirst. There's a lot of desire. There's a lot of reflection about shells and houses and how people hide or don't hide. That like sort of desire to desire to make a real connection, at least with Longhorn, in that moment, is is balanced so oddly by we get this feeling through the novel that the narrator has not really seen Longhorn for himself most of the time, right? And there's this sort of vein of like being aware of how inauthentic we can be, even towards the people we really want to be with, coupled with the fact that the epistolary format, is constantly being addressed, either to us, the reader, or to an absent lover, in this way that's so longing for connection. Yeah, it's really, really fascinating stuff.
Yeah, I also was thinking about like possibly maybe it's the face, maybe it's the look, it's the
Hmm.
self and the other and those sort of things when I was thinking about it. But loneliness, I think it's also, I think like you said, it's a great way of putting it, very apt, I think. Uh, Either the eye or like, an opening or a wall. And I think she does hit upon a wall constantly.
Hmm.
And the wall somehow is like hitting upon a wall. It's not entirely her fault, It's somewhere in between where she's constantly thinking about whether or not she wants to be part of this place at all,
Hmm.
or be a tourist or a traveler or sort of escape it, whether
Hmm.
she wants to be someone, and that question of someone keeps coming up. Are you an individual or are you not? And there are, I think, a couple of sections where that intrudes. In the first, where the queen, the mother is shown, the ant
Hmm.
mother, seemingly the ant mother, and she comes upon this like resting large creature that seems so painfully laid out, and says, uh, says like looks upon them, and then the mother sort of reacts and is like, "You think I am someone?"
Uh-huh.
And then that sort of structure returns later into the section with the mimic,
Right.
and then and then and then it's like Longhorn looks at her and he's like, "Oh, you want everyone to be someone. You
Hmm.
want what someone is at the beginning to be who he is at the end." And and then there's also this section with a lot of which I read as like an entropic formation constantly through the
Mm.
text, and it's about that procession that happens,
Oh yeah.
uh, and where everybody's sort of standing right outside her house, and she's come out and she's looking at them, and they're all staring. But what strikes her is that they're not celebrating, or there's no sense of festivity. They're just kind of staring, silently.
Hmm.
And I think she's not sure whether what she wants to be part of it, or protect it, save it, act in some way. And she can't act, whether she can't act because she's sort of held herself to passivity, or held herself to a certain standard. I don't quite know whether it's that, because there is a desire to be part of it and feel yourself lost among that sort of crowd. But at the same time, there's warning and there's sort of stopping her from entering that side as well. And I think even Longhorn will warn her over and over, but also invite her. And Longhorn does that. In the beginning, he's like, don't, be careful of flowers, be careful of
Hmm.
being swallowed whole. And then towards the end, he's showing her the city and he's telling her, yes, it's also you. It's also
Hmm.
you and me. It's yours and mine. And at the end, he's also in same similarly in that mimic chapter, he's come back to her and he's telling her, yes, you will have to stay here. And you can't quite tell whether it's a warning or a note of sorrow, or he's unsure about whether she wants to do this or not. And it's extremely fascinating, that sort of like tension between like whether to give in to a sense of collectivity that you
Mm,
aren't, like that's not admirable necessarily. It's not a purposive ethical cause or a political cause or something, just a sense of collectivity. Or you want to sort of hold on to something secretive and
hmm.
important to you. And I also have to wonder whether holding on to that memory of the lover or memories themselves are significant in, keeping it like keeping that tension alive.
Mm.
And it's only when she gives up the memory, it's only when her memories sort of go away with in the section with the guardian of the Oddfellows, the
Oh
remember
yeah.
day of
Uh-huh.
great day of remembrance, that and then memories break immediately, like, and she's faced with certain kind of blankness. All her memories are disappeared,
Hmm.
and all she can give back to this creature that's taking happy memories like nectar is a fictive memory, and she can just make something up. That's all she can give, and it's only then that she sort of gives up. And in giving up, does she find the lover, or does she go back to memory, or does she keep getting caught up in some sort of circular narrative? Like, I think King Melinda, that's the section where it's
Uh-huh.
mentioned that everything reoccurs. So that sense of perpetuity, whether she gets it back or whether it's part of it, whether memory is all there is, and even that, losing that is a good thing, a bad thing, is a scary thing. I don't quite have answers to where she wants us to go with it. I I think there's sort of big revealing questions about what's possible or not, but they're significant questions, at least insofar as do we want to, what is questions about desire, insofar as what is it that we want to, like, we do want to be part of a collective and we
Hmm.
do want to love. So is it impossible to have both? And maybe that's the something in between that constantly is driving this narrative. That's what I'm struck by.
Yeah, I don't want to like I don't want to try to like decode this novel or anything, but there's along with these other themes we're talking about, there's this sort of really poking at the desire for kind of fixity, or like knowing, kind of like this desire to be able to know something completely, and then having to be kind of shown that you can't have that. There's the scene where Longhorn takes the narrator up to look at the city when the narrator has been asking for a map, and is told like, there are no maps, maps would be impossible, and is taken to this great height and sort of looks down at the city and sees it being torn down and rebuilt and streets changing and going from, big giant thoroughfares to little mazy side streets. And then it's happening, Longhorn says, this is what it's like all the time. It's too quick to make a map of. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like as we're talking, this connects somehow to how the narrator is thinking about herself and about other selves, and this sort of like this desire to have a map, this desire to have a picture of what the reality is, and having to confront that you can't really have that. But you still want to be there, right? You don't need a map to be in a place. You don't need to totally understand someone to be with them. Yeah. Oh, this novel is great. It's so haunting. And I really love I love the way that the big outlandish sort of genre elements of it are so low key. The narrator is like, it's not that the narrator is unaware of the strangeness of all the things that they're seeing in TAINARON, but it's never sort of like dwelled on or sort of like put in your face in this sort of like flashy, like, oh, they're bug people. It's just these little details that really jump out. Where's the little line? This is really early on. She says, I think this is in the first or second letter. She says, "Do you know, I am sometimes startled when, from amid the throng, a snout-like face sways toward me, above which nimble antennae, supple as lashes, or when, in a cafe, a waiter approaches my table, his mandibles protruding just like those of a dragonfly grub." and you meet these big strange creatures. The almost every chapter is sort of centered around some kind of encounter with some kind of strange person who has like very interesting features. But I don't know how to put my finger on it. Just those insect-like or weird or surreal or alien elements always seem secondary. They're never like, oh, here's the chapter about this weird thing. It's always primarily about sort of how the narrator is reacting and reflecting on what she's encountering. In this way that's just really, really good. I could think of writing a novel about a strange city of bugs in a way that would be so kind of boring and by the numbers. And this is so utterly different than that. And a very small part of it, but part of that I think is interesting, is that this city is on Earth, right? Like the narrator talks about places in Europe, mentions things offhand that like clearly situated as like the narrator at least is coming from, a place that we're familiar with. And to me, that just doubles and triples on the strangeness of what TAINARON is and where TAINARON is and what we're actually getting here when we're reading these letters.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true because she's getting letters from other places, from her home country, and there is a sense of international Europeanism almost
Hmm.
to certain sections. Yeah, it drove me to sort of look up the name a little bit, and so Tainaron is actually a place.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Yeah, and I was really surprised by it. And then there is the
It's
bit
in,
of it where,
is that in Greece? Is that right?
yes, it's in
Yeah.
Greece.
Hmm.
And then there is like a mythical sort of Tainaron, which is entirely gate to Hades, gate to the underworld.
Mm.
And that of course, it brings up these questions. Is the narrator dead? Has she gone to past
Hmm.
the land of the living? And is that why nothing ever reaches the lover? Or is the lover dead? That
Hmm.
question, I think, is irresolvable. But also, why is this place that functions so much like a city where the most important function also is left to the bugs, which
Hmm.
is disposing of the dead?
Hmm.
Uh, Even why is there death inside a city of death? Confusing entirely.
Yeah.
But
Uh-huh.
I really do agree with the fact that the encounters with the strange or the odd are never sort of this important part of it. It's always sort of flash and go, and you get a sense of unfamiliarity. And I think one of my the one section that sort of felt so familiar and then immediately not was the section where she begins her letter and she's saying, okay, so I've had to shift home. I'm moving away from one home to the other.
Hmm.
And she's like, yeah, it was a difficult time. And then she goes on to say what really happened because of that. And I think she meets she starts hearing a sound in the middle of the night, which is of almost like furniture being dragged from one
Hmm.
point to the other, and it goes over and over again. And it feels like a very natural sort of thing that you would have to deal with, which is upstairs noisy neighbor making noise in odd hours. And then she does meet the neighbor
Hmm.
and goes through this process of like looking at her. And of course, she's a bug people. It's an old woman with bug eyes and very old, very frail. And you get a sense that, oh, she cannot be doing this at all. And it's a sense of fear that immediately develops in her.
Hmm.
And it's what she does, like Kron basically takes a setting and then makes that encounter seem seemingly immediate, absolutely accessible,
Hmm.
and then defamiliarizes you, and
Yeah.
also then takes the defamiliarization through a sort of rational processing, like, oh, she's old, oh, she can't be doing that,
Hmm.
oh, why is she moving the furniture back and forth, therefore there must be a reason. Is
Hmm.
the reason that she wants to scare me? So there's a rationalization of that defamiliarization as well. And then finally she'll end that chapter with saying, oh, it was almost so formless that it resembled human life. The sound was so formless that it resembled human life. And
Hmm.
you're like, that's terrifying.
Yeah. Yep.
And that's an incredibly, like, it's such a short
Yeah.
section and so well done, that structure. And And I think the question of homes itself immediately becomes even more fuller somehow, that understanding that we have, which in the novel is a complicated understanding of home. On the first place, you have a narrator who has traveled away from her home country, is either a tourist or a traveler, an exile, or displaced somehow. You get that sense. And she's homesick and she's constantly thinking back to home, and she doesn't remember whether to go back, why she came here, and she doesn't know if she's allowed to stay or if she's allowed to leave. So that sets up a situation of like complicated relationship with a sense of home. And then there is all your mundane, everyday renting difficulties, finding, survival related questions. Then there is, looking around the city question. And finally, there is that question of home itself being a complicated thing, because the people of TAINARON carry their dwellings with them.
Yeah.
Yeah, and she says that where dwelling ends and inhabitant begins, it's not clear. And then because they're simultaneously dwelling in many places at the same time, which metaphorically makes sense. Consider the narrator. She's doing the same thing. She's back, she's in, but at the same time, it's almost like a, she's talking about it as like, being hidden away and unknown to the world. And, if somebody's speaking from that space of contained dwelling, carrying their dwelling, then you can't really hear them or understand them. And then she ends again. I love the chapter endings. I'm obsessed with the chapter endings because I think they're not really clues, but they're sort of like they immediately break through that form and throw some new question at you that makes you think of the whole thing anew. It's brilliant. When she ends this chapter, I remember, I think it's the 8th letter, and then says that, and then there are those who cannot bear such a situation, who wish to see everything face to face and to reveal, open, show the whole world the nakedness of things. Now and then the temptation has become overwhelming to them. And it's like there is a desire for those people who have their homes, like who carry their homes with them, to sort of like break free. And it goes back to that question of like self-immolation that comes up, and the question of the fireflies that are dying and dying in that sort of brilliant, glittering way, and the bitterness that the narrator feels, as well as death throughout the novel. Like death throughout the novel seems to be both a moment of celebration and a moment of astonishment and a moment of loss, and makes me wonder whether it's not. I mean, I could very well be sitting in a moment of grief and finding this immensely comforting.
Yeah. Yeah, that I love that section in about the people who carry their houses with them and then the people who can't stand it anymore. Just that tension between wanting to, be in your home literally or metaphorically and sort of be hidden and be safe, but then also this desire to see others and this desire maybe to be seen, but that seeing, that breaking out of the shell is like an act of violence and an act of death maybe. Yeah, that's just so good. Ah, I think this is maybe a good time for a quick break.
I wanted to carry through that last conversation and think about a little bit about that sense of something inaccessible and secret about it all. That that section a little bit does, like, I don't know if secrecy definitely is important to Kron. And I think there's a Lightspeed magazine interview that where she says something that all her work sort of deals with the relation between the inner secret world and the external self, biological and non-biological.
Huh.
And that's revelatory, I think, in a
Yeah.
little way, but it's also, I think the sense of secrecy is also attached to a sense of something to do with knowledge or something largely epistemic about that whole space.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in that self-immolation chapter itself, she's also getting at it by talking about these people who seem to be burning themselves and,
Oh yeah. Uh-huh.
and saying why some people choose self-destruction as if it's a privilege. And then Longhorn will explain it to her and tell her they want to redeem Tainaron and all of that. And then the narrator seems to try and understand them very closely, as if they have some sense of knowledge, but they are keeping it from the world. All they're doing is in this moment of like self-immolating. And it's not like the narrator goes out of the way to sort of figure it out either. And then in the chapter right after that is the chapter with the dwelling. And then again, she's talking about people who are hiding themselves and holding back
Mm-hmm.
and then revealing themselves in that moment of death, or either death or, because they reveal themselves, they tend to death. I think the entire novel sort of ends for me in the last chapter itself, but not the last line. And but when she sort of goes into the pupil stage and
Mm-hmm.
closes off after Longhorn disappears and the rhinoceros beetle comes in and says, "Okay, I'm also everybody's gone and winter has set in." And instead, she says something very interesting, which says that she says that I shall close from the inside. That's such an odd phrasing. It's not, it's sort of like, it's very literal. Okay, drawing sort of a cloak around yourself or like
Mm-hmm.
that pupil cocoon around yourself. But it's also something to say about like subjectivity and that sense of interiority that we're thinking about.
Mm-hmm.
And what does it mean to use that very interiority to sort of close yourself off?
Hmm.
And how does that sort of relate to making this whole sort of world available to us? And is that something she's doing from the very get-go, or is that something that Tyneron is teaching her to do?
Mm-hmm.
And is that what metamorphosis is for the novel? That's where I'm sort of circling around a little bit in
Mm-hmm.
thinking about that's the ending as well.
Yeah. And that connects on so well to this idea of like questions about identity, but also more than identity, just a fascination with seeing seeing what's at the heart of things, whether or not you can really like encounter or be encountered. Huh, that's really interesting. That idea of that epistemic and searching for secrets. I don't know if this connects, but I really loved that sequence, one of the letters where the narrator is reflecting on her childhood and listening to the radio,
Yes,
which
yes.
which I think is it's I don't know if it's the only one, but it's one of the very few chapters that it's not clearly related to Tainaron. Like I don't think we see any bug people in it or anything like that. I'm not positive, but I don't think so. But she was thinking about when she was a child and she loved listening to the radio, but not the main station, sort of like tuning in between. I think the chapter is called White Noise and talks about finding this sort of solace or maybe just kind of being fixated on says this space in between the stations that's deserted and roadless as the spaces between stars, but then finding in that static, in that sort of seemingly formlessness, hearing sort of other voices through it. Yeah, I don't know if that gets to I don't know if that connects, but it's that idea of looking and listening for something in this sort of confusion that's around us and trying to understand it. But even that chapter is like as part of an attempt to maybe like express who she is, which feels like it either connects to that like closing in and that like going inside, the snail shell, or because you're trying to make yourself seen into breaking out of it in that sort of like exuberant but maybe violent kind of act of revealing. Huh. I really
Yeah,
like I really like that this novel more than many things I've read recently. It really drew me in. It was a delight to read. It's really vivid, but I just found myself with all of these questions, not like plot level questions, but just like I was just left after every letter being like, what did that mean? What was that about? It's mysterious, but there's almost like a like a surfeit of clues. There's so many ways that you can read each little line because each of Crohn's sentences are just so good. Hmm. I don't want to monopolize, but I wanted to make sure we talked about the city a little bit, and I don't really have I don't have an overarching theory about cityness, but when I was reading this, this is just a really good strange city, and it made me think about a sort of pet theory of mine, which is about genre literature as tourism, and this sort of connection or maybe a potential way to read that when we read these fantastic or marvelous places, how that lines up with like actually being a tourist and cultural voyeurism. And there's this like weird sort of double desire when you're a tourist that you have a desire for something kind of strange that you can marvel at, something exotic. And that's part of what, genre literature is doing a lot of. That sense of wonder and all that, magical or technological or alien or whatever, things and sights, that's why we're here, right? Like that's why we're reading this book to get this strange stuff. But at the same time, when you're a tourist, and I think when you're reading generally, and maybe genre fiction specifically, I think that there's also this sort of like maybe inauthentic or at least problematic desire to also sort of be home at the same time, right? That like when you visit another city on vacation, you want to see the sights, and sort of live a different life than you would in your home city. But there's also this sort of fantasy that like, oh, and I could live here, not just that I could live here, but like this fantasy that I do live here, and this sort of like desire to jump to this sort of like, I don't know, like assumed indigeneity or like, this, but it's kind of fake. I don't know. Does that make sense? I was thinking about
Yes,
that.
it does.
I was thinking about that here, and especially with and we'll circle back to this, but with the narrator's relation to Longhorn, who is like her, and I like say this advisedly, her like native guide, who she doesn't she doesn't really maybe respect as much as she should, and doesn't really realize that till towards the end. And he just seems so much wiser than her, and like he's being kind of kind to her, but I often get this feeling that he's like kind of exasperated with her, and constantly sort of like showing her the shortcomings of her assumptions.
I think this is a very good Strange Cities book. I mean, and I love Strange Cities books because primarily I think you've pretty much gotten it right because it is a touristy sort of feeling, which is there's a desire to inhabit something, but also there's a desire to sort of see its gears and see its wheels and
Hmm.
see how the city functions that isn't entirely possible when you actually are a tourist
Hmm.
and is far more easier to inhabit when you are reading one of those touristy city books. And I think more than that, also there is a sense of trying to make sense of the city that is constantly undermined by TAINARON itself.
Hmm.
Because, and we see that mostly with the figure of the surveyor who
Oh
comes in,
yeah.
and it's
Uh-huh.
a bit of this godlike thing where he says, I'm measuring everything, and he's very self serious. And then he says, I'm the measure of all things. And
Hmm.
he means that literally.
Yeah.
Like, and it's a very funny sort of moment. The book does have its moments of humor, I will say that.
Hmm.
And for all its sense of loneliness and longing, it does have its moments of humor. And so he'll say something like, I'm the measure of all things. And later on, Longhorn will talk about the city and he'll give her the sense of that largesse and then immediately tell her that, oh, Tyneron is an event. It
Hmm.
cannot be measured.
Hmm.
There is that sort of constant move, like, you know, jostling for trying to make sense of a place when you're in it that seems to be undercut. But I actually read the sense of, you know, trying to that sort of violence of sort of trying to make sense of a place also as like Longhorn's character particularly telling exacerbate a little frustrated with her, a little bothered by the number of questions that she has, and also is wiser. I didn't quite see him as entirely just the native informant of sorts. He is her guide. And I felt like he did carry about it that sort of gentlemanly European air
Uh-huh.
of sort of snobbishness.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a feeling of, oh, okay, there's a sense of assimilation that is being warded off.
Mm.
And I don't know if that's also part of what Longhorn is trying to say, that, oh, it's us, it's you, it's me, we're all part of this. And she kinds of wards off. She's
Mm-hmm.
also caught up in it. And I think strange cities have a way of doing that. Tourism has a way of doing that, being home, not at home. And it's even more complicated by the fact that you don't quite know why you've left. There is
Mm-hmm.
obviously a very direct economic, financial, and social, political violence to tourism as it exists today. But
Mm-hmm.
in this narrative, I think the tourism is not entirely certain about its own touristic impulse,
Uh-huh.
or wants to undermine that touristic impulse
Mm-hmm.
by putting it to the question of, like, can you actually ever leave a place? That's sort of
Mm-hmm.
a question.
Uh-huh.
Whether it's your own home country where it constantly intrudes upon this one, or if it's TAINARON itself, which is sort of enclosing the narrator as well.
Mm-hmm.
And that seems to be, for me, the sort of strangeness of the city.
Yeah. I was thinking a lot about Sofia Samatar's A Stranger in Alondria while reading this, which is one of my favorite novels, but also the that is a the narrator of that is sort of in love with the city, Bane, in this city or this country, Alondria, but he's a stranger there. He's from another culture and another place, and that informs his whole experience. Is that first he has this very romanticized view of what the city is, and then sort of as that gets challenged or eroded, the novel really changes. And then the back half of the novel is all about him being literally haunted by someone from his homeland. But yeah, I was just thinking about that a lot. I was thinking about Niveau's new book, The City in Glass, which is a lot about, I think, sort of like, it's doing a lot, but sort of a warning about getting too fixated on the idea of a city and being in love with it, because cities are always changing and you can always leave them. And I think that's part of that here, right? That like the narrator's desire for a map, is shown to be a sort of like, I don't know, a desire you cannot fulfill and is maybe harmful to even have this idea that that's the kind of city it is. It's interesting. The Surveyor, and I love that chapter. And it's both so comic and so rich. And it also has a lot of these little flourishes of how Crone constantly reminds you about the insect nature of the people. Because the surveyor, like, he has a little hat, like an official hat, and he's like sitting on a bench and he's eating a sandwich, but he's eating a sandwich with his many rows of teeth. And so it's this sudden like, oh, wait, right, right. And I was visualizing him as kind of like an inchworm, right? Like literally, right? Like he like goes around the city and sort of like stretches
Uh,
out and measures things. And so yeah, it's very comic, but it's also one of the more, nakedly philosophically allegorical parts of the book, right? It's just Protagoras, just straight up, he's the measure of all things. And and then when later when Longhorn has that line that like, what is it? The Taineron's not a place, it's an event. You can't measure it. And I'm like, well, what are these generations of official city surveyors doing? Or is it saying something about how you can only measure this place like by yourself? You can't make like an external record of it. You can just sort of like
ah,
literally lay your body against it. And that's in the moment that your body's against it, you have the measure of that bit of it. And that's all you can do. Yeah.
oh, like the dwelling, like your
Mm-hmm.
own dwelling.
Yeah.
I was thinking actually of the prince as well.
Mm-hmm.
What do these people like? What do these bug people like? What is the point of having all of these jobs, various sort of jobs that do not really make sense in
Mm-hmm.
Longhorn's view as well? And Longhorn does seem to say that about a lot of people. He says, self-immolators, what is the point of them?
Uh-huh.
The prince, what is the point of the prince?
Uh-huh.
This uh, surveyor, what is the point anyway? But they seem to somehow still exist within the landscape of this strange city, because and they exist through their sense of loss and being somehow regurgitating and repeating that sense of loss constantly.
Mm-hmm.
And the prince does that. The prince is just sitting in one place and calling people to him, but nobody arrives. And then he has that really painful line, and it sort of stuck with me. He says that everything has ended. My princess has left me. She's dead, and I'm just waiting.
Mm.
Then he'll say, I can go anywhere. I can do anything. Everything is permitted to me. And he says
Mm.
that with such sorrow.
Mm.
And it and that sense of like usefulness or purposiveness that sort of feels like something that we're looking for, and even the narrator is looking for in the text, is undermined by that purposelessness, or
Mm-hmm.
that,
Yeah.
I don't know, sorrow, bitter sorrow of everything is permitted now. And
Mm-hmm.
if everything is permitted, but it feels like that, what does
Yeah.
that even do?
Yeah.
It's I love this text for the sort of, it took me a rereading to sort of go back and see that, oh, everything sort of goes back. Like there's no way she calls it kaleidoscopic. She calls her novels kaleidoscopic. I think that's
Mm-hmm.
very cool,
Mm-hmm.
because Vandermeer refers to them as mosaic, and we'd read just TAINARON and
Mm.
think, okay, epistolary. But she says they're kaleidoscopic.
Mm-hmm.
And I get that sense of, you can constantly shift and turn like a kaleidoscope and make
Mm.
different kind of meanings out of them.
Mm-hmm. That's good. That yeah, that line of everything is permitted and the sadness of that. Huh, that's really good. To quote another philosopher, freedom is just another word for nothing left to lose, right? Like this idea that like
Yes,
real boundary, not having boundaries, not having roles, not having responsibilities, that there's a sadness to that. And of course that's also part of the experience of being on vacation, right? And being in a new city and away from everything is this sort of
yes, that's true.
unrootedness. Yeah. I want to come back. We should probably think about wrapping up here pretty soon, but I wanted to just come back to Longhorn a little bit. Which also, by the way, I just loved that. I don't think Longhorn gets a ton of description other than in maybe the first letter,
Mm.
but I love Longhorn beetles, and so I just really
Oh,
loved visualizing this like really dapper, elegant sort of creature in all these chapters. I just really love that. There's my one of my favorite lines about Longhorn is after he's gone. And so he's gone. It's not super clear what's happening, like sort of a winter at like the end, but like people are hibernating, maybe they're dying, maybe they're going into cocoons, going into metamorphosis. When Longhorn is gone and the narrator gets this sort of temporary guide replacement, the rhinoceros, presumably beetle. But the narrator says about Longhorn, then I saw that I had never known him and that I had never even wanted to know him. And it's this sort of moment of self-realization and kind of guilt and sort of reckoning with that. But then it has this weird, interesting, positive thing that I really loved, which she says, his outline, which I had once drawn around him in order to be able to show him and name him, had disappeared. It liberated the great stranger who was a much realer Longhorn than the person I once knew, small and separate. And I just adore that. This idea that, you make a construct of the people you meet, and then you sort of want to fit them in there, and you want to make all the details of your fictional version match up with the quote unquote real version. But of course, really what we do is we do that the other way around, right? And we get upset when the real person doesn't do what we expect our fictional model to do. And this idea that there's something yeah, what is it? The bigger stranger, right? The great stranger who's sort of like inside the person we think we know. I just really like that. I think it's Timothy Morton somewhere has a line about, when you're with someone for a long time, one of the odder things about that is that the more you know someone, the stranger they become. Like no one can be as strange as the person you have known for years and decades, because really people have this sort of inexhaustible well of otherness in them that you can never really fully know or fully map. But you can't really access that with a stranger. You can kind of like glimpse that there's someone there, but that it really takes time and trying to get to know someone to sort of like learn how much you can't know someone. And even though Longhorn is gone when the narrator has this revelation, it feels like at least half of some kind of reconciliation or like coming to a better standing between the narrator and the Longhorn. Like she hasn't like seen him or been able to do anything about this after she has it. But I really love it because you get these odd little glimpses of their relationship and they feel kind of, I don't know, not it's not that they have friction, but you like I get this feeling that Longhorn's kind of exasperated with her. I get this feeling that the narrator doesn't really know him very well or isn't very interested in him, and she should be maybe. And so to have that realization at the end, I really liked, even though it doesn't go anywhere.
I agree. I love that bit as well. And I think it's sort of true that the narrator has no sense of him as a person and probably just sees him as somebody who's, going to show her the city, show her the ropes a little bit, and
Hmm.
sort of here is an encyclopedia. He is the narrator of this encyclopedia for me. And that little bit where she talks about his outline, I
Hmm.
I adore that section, like that outline somehow also similar to that, cocoon itself.
Hmm.
And it made me think a little bit also when you were talking about it, the sense of constructedness of people and the constructions that we have for other people, and not knowing obviously how the levels to which people can be made strange for us. And of course, in the novel itself, confronting that strangeness, that otherness, does lead the narrator to confront her own strangeness, her own
Hmm.
otherness, and get lost in it. But I'm also thinking about what this says about fictiveness itself, about writing itself,
Mm.
about the sort of nature of having, and it's, having written a character and then the character sort of doesn't do what you want it to do.
Hmm.
And it sort of goes beyond the limits of what you had even imagined. And I don't think that's what Kron is talking about, but it's sort of that sense of fictiveness, that fictiveness reveals something beyond what we are working with. And
Mm.
maybe that's somewhere we can place the surveyor and measure
Uh-huh.
and as well. And I think fictiveness is also what allows, I think, her to come up with a happy memory
Mm.
from a survey magazine. Do you have thoughts on the structure of this fictiveness? I'm still stuck on that a little bit.
Yeah, about do you mean the structure of like this novel in particular or like the like fictiveness largely?
The
Yeah.
fictiveness that does get revealed through this novel, I think.
Yeah. That is interesting. That takes me back to that takes me back to like Tolkien and like subcreation and like thinking about the way that on the one hand you can think of artistic creation as sort of like particularly I think, in writing and in fiction of making this kind of small thing that is, by its very nature, it is less, it's less complex. It's not overflowing the way that quote unquote reality is, right? Because it's just these words, just these lines on a page. But I think you can also think of it as like an imperfect glimpse of something else that maybe is that kind of, more overflowing, infinite kind of, I don't want to say reality, but this existence, right, that can't be fully captured. I'm not much of a fiction writer myself, so I don't want to speculate too much, but I do think about the way that in in certain kinds of works, there's a feeling of kind of richness that we've only got some of it. And I don't know how you do that exactly, but the works that I really like glom onto and seek out and want to come back to, and TAINARON's one of them now, have that feeling of something much larger and not reduced. That this is not like a distillation or like a sort of like child's playset version of someplace, but it's
Mm.
actually just an imperfect kind of rubbing, of something that's bigger and weirder behind it.
I feel like, yeah, there's truth to that. And I'm thinking also of maybe, her, maybe there's something about art of itself being revelatory and some sort of
Mm,
moment of sort of reckoning itself with the place of art. Because Cron knows her philosophy, knows her sort of art history and her philosophy and all of those
hmm.
things. So there's no way that she's not putting them all together. And I think there's somewhere also where she said that her entire philosophy has been condensed into TAINARON. And
Ah,
that makes me want to really like dig into it, but I'm not
yeah.
going to.
Huh.
But she has some semblance of truth, some idea of
Mm.
like truth at the heart of this question of like making things up and coming up with things to sort of
Yeah.
populate her world, that sense of strangeness and making, whether that's subjective or there is obviously a desire to break down that sort of species hierarchy and think about subjectivity differently. There's also a desire to think about embodied subjectivity, I think,
Mm-hmm.
very strongly. And then there is also a desire to think about meaning and knowledge and secrecy and interiority in ways that complicate our understanding of what fiction itself can do or what
Mm.
novels itself can do.
Mm-hmm.
And form, therefore, becomes that thing that she keeps coming back to somewhere. I think she also said that she wants to write an essay novel. What,
Mm.
and that's an interesting sort of juxtaposition, and which makes me realize that she is constantly thinking about that sense of form while as itself being something form and structure and making something apparent as significant in her work. And there's somewhere to go with all of this, I'm sure, but that's not
Yeah.
very immediately arriving. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's okay. I mean, we've made a little bit of a scratch at it. Oh, that's great. That's a great take. I love this. Yeah, I'm so glad you selected this. This was really, really good to come to it. I know I'm going to come back to it and want to dig through more of her
I'm
work now.
so glad you enjoyed it.
Yeah. But before we get out of here, Shinjini, thanks again so much for being here. Is there anything you want to share with people about anything you're working on or is coming out from you soon or where people can find you or anything like that?
I am probably in the process of working on a couple of things, but nothing that's immediately. I'm likely going to be doing some reviewing, some writing, in the usual places.
Hmm.
But I can be found on Twitter, unfortunately,
Yeah.
uh, at Shinjini underscore day, which is my name. And I also have a WordPress website if anyone wants to look at more of my work.
Awesome. Yeah, I will get that in the notes. Yeah, this has been really lovely. I hope you have a lovely rest of your day, and I hope the weather there continues going in a good direction for a while.
Thank you so much. It's been a great time sort of being here and talking about TAINARON. It's really fun to have been able to go so long and get really into the novel.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks so much. A Meal of Thorns is a podcast from the Ancillary Review of Books, an online magazine founded to address the radical possibilities of criticism, with a focus on speculative fiction, world literature, and utopian impulses. Go to ancillaryreviewofbooks.org for regular reviews, essays, interviews, and more. Our opening poem is by Barchahari, translated by John Bruff. Our music is by Giselle Gabrielle Garcia. Our artwork is by Rob Patterson at The Ratio Farm. If you'd like to support the podcast and the Ancillary Review of Books, that is rad. A few different ways you can do that. Subscribe to our Patreon at patreon.com/ancillary review. That would be super cool of you. We really want to get the ARB to a point where we can pay our contributors. Check out our show notes for bookshop links. If you buy a book through there, we get a cut. The internet, as you know, is a dying hellscape, stalked by mindless algorithms. Do your part to resist, or at least be a little more mindful. Click like, click share, leave a comment or review wherever you find us. Tell someone you know to check us out. It really helps. Questions, suggestions, pedantic notes about things we got wrong? Drop us an email at mealofthorns@gmail.com. I cannot believe that, with TAINARON's discussions of people who carry their houses with them, I forgot to somehow reference They Might Be Giants' Snail Shell off their criminally underrated John Henry. My bad. Next time, I'm talking to Garrett Bridger Gilmore about Victor LaValle's The Ballad of Black Tom and the Lovecraft Boomlet. Distressingly relevant. Until then, solidarity from me and the Ancillary Review of Books. Read well out there. Or
But
maybe Crone is just really good at expressing that through the language and we picked it up, but we just can't textually defend it.
yeah, yeah, we really have to dig to
Uh-huh.
figure that out.